I pulled into Ridgeline Storage in Spokane Valley, Washington, around 10 to 10, the kind of late where the world feels closed even if the signs still say open. The gas light had been on for miles, and the needle sat so low it looked pinned there on purpose. I didn't care. I'd already done the math. Get through the night, get through the week, keep my stuff from ending up on a curb. The back of my car sagged under taped boxes and a duffel bag wedged between them. Everything I still owned that mattered fit into cardboard and cheap plastic bins. That's what it had come to. 2 months ago, I had a desk, a paycheck, and a calendar full of meetings that pretended to mean something. Then, a restructure email hit at breakfast, and my access was gone before lunch. I wasn't special. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was just tired, and every day since had been another small problem stacked on top of the last one. I tried the usual stuff. I applied everywhere. I took whatever gig apps would approve me for. I delivered food, hauled junk, helped a guy move a couch that smelled like old smoke. I did a couple quick tech cleanups for a friend's cousin, password resets, router setups, basic fixes, and it barely covered groceries. My landlord stopped calling and started texting, which was somehow worse, short messages with dates and numbers like he was building a paper trail. I couldn't blame him. He wanted his money and I didn't have it. So when a posting popped up for an overnight facilities attendant, easy hours, steady pay, and a unit included as long as I stayed on, I took it without trying to be picky. 17 an hour. Not great, not terrible, but predictable. The real hook was the storage. I could stop shuffling boxes between friends' garages and temporary corners of borrowed basements. I could put a lock on a door and know my things would still be there in the morning. That kind of certainty starts to feel like luxury when you're living week to week, and every plan has an asterisk next to it. I rolled to a stop just inside the front lot and cut the headlights. The chain-link fence wrapped the place like a cage, barbed wire curled along the top in lazy loops. Floodlights sat on tall poles, and half of them worked well enough to pretend the shadows weren't there. The rest of the lot fell into dark pockets between the light rows of roll-up doors disappearing back like teeth. Somewhere beyond the fence, the steady rush of I-90 kept time. Cars passing in waves, then nothing, then another wave. I sat with both hands on the wheel and let the engine tick as it cooled. The air outside looked cold, the kind of cold that makes metal feel mean. My car smelled like cardboard dust and stale coffee, and my shoulders felt tight from hauling boxes all week. I told myself I didn't need to be brave, just steady. I just needed to follow procedures, do the rounds, write the logs, get paid, make it through the month. Still, in the moment after the highway noise dipped, the silence in the lot didn't feel empty. It felt aimed, like it knew I was there, and it was waiting for me to move first. The office was a small prefab box near the front gate, vinyl siding on the outside and fluorescent light on the inside that made everything look a little washed out. When I pulled the door open, the air hit me warm and dry, like the heater had been running too long with the windows sealed. It smelled faintly like printer paper and old coffee. A woman stood behind the desk with a clipboard laid out in front of her, like she'd been waiting in that exact posture for someone to arrive. Mid to late 30s, hair pulled back clean, no extra jewelry, no wasted motion. Her clothes weren't fancy, but they were sharp in a way that made me think she wasn't here because she liked it. She was here because the job required a person to be here, and she was going to do the handoff and leave. That was the vibe. She didn't smile. She didn't frown either. Just a steady look that landed on me and didn't move. "You're Cameron Briggs," she said. "Yeah," I said. She checked a line on her clipboard without looking down for more than a second, then reached under the desk and brought up a heavy ring of keys. The tags were cheap plastic, handwritten in black marker, the words smudged like they'd been handled a lot. She slid them across the desk and they clinked against the metal edge. I picked them up. Gate, office, restroom. A couple more that didn't mean anything to me yet. She tapped the desk with the pen and pointed to a spiral logbook open to a blank page. The columns were simple: time, location, notes, initials. There was a wall clock mounted above the filing cabinet in the corner, plain white face, black hands, second hand making that soft click that you only notice when you're trying not to. To the left of the logbook sat an old beige desk phone with a coiled cord, the kind I hadn't seen in someone's house in years. Next to it was a small monitor with a 4-panel camera view. The picture was grainy and a little too bright, like the contrast was turned up. The front gate was one panel, a stretch of fence and asphalt lit by floodlight. Another panel showed a row of doors outside, orange metal and padlocks. The other 2 panels were active, but the image didn't look stable. The timestamp in one corner seemed to hesitate every few seconds, not long enough to call it a glitch, but long enough to make my eyes want to stare and confirm. I didn't say anything. I just watched it for a beat, then looked away. The office itself was tight. Desk, rolling chair, filing cabinet, a narrow closet door beside it, and a folded site map pinned to a corkboard on the wall. The exit sign above the door glowed a steady red, but there was another exit sign visible through the interior window, pointing toward the 3-story building deeper in the lot. The arrow angled toward a side entrance, the one that led into the interior units. Indoor hallway. Climate-controlled rows. The kind of place people stored furniture in boxes they didn't want ruined by weather. Rena, because I already had her name from the paper clipped to her clipboard, unfolded the site map and laid it flat. She used the pen tip like a pointer. Outdoor rows labeled by letters. A block marked interior units with thick lines showing corridors. She didn't linger on it, but her pen hovered there for a second longer than anywhere else, like it mattered. Then she looked up at me again, and the look was the same as before. Not unfriendly. Just final. "Don't leave the property once I walk out," she said flatly. I swallowed, more out of habit than fear. It felt like the kind of instruction that shouldn't need to be said unless someone had tried it. "What if I need to call 911?" I asked. "Use your cell for that," she said. She didn't add anything. "No, but you won't need to." "No. This is just policy. Just that." She stood, reached for a manila envelope on a shelf behind the desk, and held it out to me. It was sealed. My name was written across the front in neat block letters, like someone took their time making sure it was readable. The paper felt thicker than normal, stiff and clean. "Read the envelope before midnight," she told me. I took it and turned it over once, like I might find a hint on the back. Nothing. No logo, no return address, just paper and my name. Rena capped her pen, clipped it back onto the clipboard, and slid the clipboard into a drawer. She moved like she'd already done this 100 times and didn't want it to become 101. She grabbed a jacket off the back of the chair and shrugged into it. The motion was quick, practiced. For a second, I thought she might say something else, maybe the usual first night stuff, like where the bathroom key fit or what time someone would relieve me. Instead, she walked around the desk, headed for the door, and only paused long enough to glance at the monitor like she was checking that it was still on. The image in the corner panel did that tiny hitch again, the timestamp repeating the same second before clicking forward. Rena didn't react. If she noticed, she didn't show it. She opened the office door, and cold air rushed in along the floor. The sound from the highway slid into the room, distant, constant, like the world reminding us it was still out there. Rena stepped through without looking back, and the door swung shut behind her with a soft latch. I stood there holding the keys in the envelope, listening to her footsteps fade across the lot. Through the window, I saw her walk to a dark SUV parked near the fence. She got in, headlights flared, and then she was gone, rolling toward the access road and disappearing into the night. The office felt smaller the second she left, like the walls moved in a few inches. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The wall clock kept clicking. The desk phone sat silent and heavy. On the monitor, the gate feed showed empty pavement and a locked fence, and beyond it, the occasional streak of headlights on I-90. I set the envelope down on the desk and held the keyring in my hand for a moment longer than I needed to. The plastic tags were warm now from my grip. Outside, the lot waited under uneven light. Inside, everything waited with it. I waited for the wall clock to roll over clean, because if I was going to start this job by following rules, I wasn't going to begin sloppy. The second hand hit the top, the minute clicked forward, and I moved. The office door had a deadbolt and a latch. I slid the bolt over, tested the handle once, then looked up at the clock again like it might argue with me. It didn't. I walked back to the desk, opened the logbook to the first blank line, and wrote it down the way the columns wanted it. 10 a.m. office, door locked, CB. Seeing it in ink steadied me a little. It turned the night into a sequence instead of a mess. The manila envelope was still where I'd set it, centered on the desk like it belonged there. My name stared back at me in neat block letters. I ran my thumb under the seal and peeled it open. The paper inside was clean and crisp, folded once, no smudges, no coffee stains, nothing that looked like it had been handled by a dozen different people. The header at the top read, "Overnight Protocol" in plain bold print. Under it was a numbered list, 6 items, tight spacing, no extra words. It looked official in the way a lot of official things look, when someone just wants you to comply. Not scary, not dramatic, just specific. Rule 1 was the lock at 10 p.m. and logging it. Rule 2 was the clock, wall clock only. No checking my phone for time again until 06 a.m. Rule 3 mentioned the indoor hallway and the exit sign, like it was a normal electrical issue. If the exit sign flickered, the hallway was closed and I needed to wait exactly 60 seconds with both feet on the office floor before moving again. Rule 4 was the desk phone. Only answer if there was a pause between rings. Ring, pause, ring. If it rang evenly without a pause, let it ring until it stopped. Rule 5 was cameras. If any feed jumped backward or skipped forward, repeating the same second or skipping seconds, stop watching it. Look away for 30 seconds. Then keep working and don't switch feeds for 10 minutes. Rule 6 was the one that didn't belong with the rest, not because it was supernatural, but because it was so oddly precise. 2:17 a.m. to 2:22 a.m., stay seated and keep the office quiet. No typing, no clicking pens, no pacing. Just sit still and let that 5-minute window pass. I read it twice, then once more slower, like maybe the third time would make it feel less weird. It didn't. It just made it feel deliberate. "This looks like standard procedure," I muttered. Saying it out loud didn't make it funny. It just made the office sound less empty for a second. I set the paper down and started checking the room like I was inventorying a kit. Wall clock above the filing cabinet. There it was, loud enough to hear when the heater cycled off. Logbook on the desk already open. Desk phone to my left, handset seated cleanly, cord coiled tight. Camera monitor to my right, 4 feeds, each with a timestamp stamped in the corner in small white numbers. I stood and walked to the door and looked up at the exit sign above it. Steady red, no flicker. Then I glanced through the interior window toward the 3-story block and found the other exit sign down the line, the one pointing toward the indoor hallway entrance. It was lit, arrow pointing where it pointed, like it always had. It didn't look dangerous. It looked like signage. Back at the desk, I picked up the phone and pressed the cradle lightly just to make sure it was seated. The dial tone wasn't on. Nothing. Just a dead quiet line waiting to be used. I set it back down and resisted the urge to poke buttons. If it only dialed one number like Rena said, then messing with it on mine at 1 felt like a good way to become the story they'd tell the next new guy. The camera monitor did its little hesitation again, the timestamp repeating the last second before moving forward. I watched it happen once, then forced myself to stop. If the protocol said don't stare at time glitches, then I wasn't going to train my brain to fixate on them. I tore a sheet of paper out of a small pad in the desk drawer, grabbed a pen, and wrote myself a simple reminder in block letters. Wall clock only. Phone rings need a pause, quiet window, 2:17 a.m. to 2:22 a.m. I didn't tape it to the monitor. I didn't stick it on the door. I just laid it beside the logbook where my eyes would land naturally. Then I sat back in the rolling chair and let the rules settle in my head the way you let a new route settle in when you're driving somewhere unfamiliar. They weren't telling me to fight anything. They weren't telling me to run. They were telling me to keep my timing clean. Don't react to bad signals. Don't get pulled into panic. Don't let someone use the phone or the cameras to steer me into doing something stupid. Most of it I could file under common sense, even if it was written in a weirdly specific way. The indoor hallway rule sounded like a safety thing. The phone rule sounded like a way to avoid answering prank calls or sales calls at night. The camera rule sounded like an old system glitching and someone wanting the guard to stop making a big deal out of it. But the quiet window was different. 2:17 a.m. to 2:22 a.m. wasn't a typical safety policy. It was a ritual disguised as procedure, and I didn't like that my brain went there immediately. Still, I needed the job. I needed the money. I needed the unit. So I did what the paper asked and what I'd promised myself I'd do. I took a breath, looked at the wall clock, and treated the night like a list of small steps that would add up to morning. And in the back of my mind, I pinned that 5-minute window like a warning label I couldn't peel off. After I finished reading the protocol, I treated the rest of the night like a job I'd done 100 times, even though I hadn't. That was the only way to keep my head straight. I set the envelope paper back on the desk, where I could see it if I needed to, put the keys where my hand would find them without thinking, and opened the logbook to a fresh page. I wrote my name at the top, the date, and shift start 10 p.m. like it mattered. Because it did. The rules weren't asking me to be brave. They were asking me to be consistent. I kept wanting to check my phone out of habit. It was a reflex more than a need. Any time I felt unsure, my hand would drift toward my pocket like a compass, like a lit screen could anchor me. I didn't do it. I left my phone face down on the desk, plugged into the charger, and forced myself to look at the wall clock instead. It felt old-fashioned in a dumb way, like I was playing security guard in a movie, but it also simplified things. One clock, one set of notes, one night. I decided on a routine that matched the paper and my own nerves. One patrol loop per hour, no extras unless I had to. Each loop would be the same route so I could tell if anything was different. I'd start from the office, walk the main lane toward the outdoor rows, cut across one aisle, come back along the fence line, then return to the office. Not a marathon, not a tour, just enough to be able to say I looked. The place had that particular storage facility smell even outside, like metal warming and cooling and dust caught in corners. The wind carried it in waves through the fence. Every time a car hit I-90, there was a soft swell of sound that rose and fell, and between those swells there were pockets of quiet that made me more aware of my own footsteps. My shoes sounded louder than they should have on the cracked pavement. I sat for a few minutes first, just to let the adrenaline from meeting Rena wear off. The office felt steady when I stayed still. Fluorescent hum, heater whisper, the logbook waiting. The camera monitor showed the gate and the same empty stretch of asphalt. Nothing moved, no faces, no cars. If I squinted, I could see the green dot of the gate keypad through the grainy image, a tiny light that meant the place was locked the way it was supposed to be. At 10:12 p.m., I stood up and checked my pockets. Keys, pen, small flashlight I'd brought in from my car. I looked at the wall clock again. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to feel the seconds pass. When it hit 10:15 p.m., I wrote it in the logbook and headed out. The cold hit my face and hands the second I stepped outside. It wasn't brutal, but it had teeth, the kind that makes you regret not wearing gloves even if you swear you'll only be out a few minutes. The floodlights made the lot look too flat. Bright where they worked, dead where they didn't. The shadows between the poles weren't dramatic. They were just there, like black water you didn't want to step in. I walked the route I'd picked, keeping my eyes moving the way I used to when I'd close up a store years ago. Doors, locks, corners, fence line. The outdoor units were all the same. Orange roll-up doors with white unit numbers stenciled on them. The locks varied. Some were bright new combination locks. Some were scratched old padlocks that looked like they'd been dropped a few times. It made the whole place feel lived in a quiet way. People left parts of themselves here and then drove away. I stopped at 3 lights on the first pass. One pole near the end of the first row flickered every few seconds, not fully out, just blinking like it couldn't decide if it was on or off. I wrote the pole number from the small sticker on the base into the log. Another light was steady, but had a buzzing sound that was louder than the others, like a transformer humming. It wasn't a crisis, but it was the kind of thing that made you think about electricity. The third was fine, but the bulb was dimmer than the ones around it, the ground beneath it not as bright. 2 doors caught my attention. One door had a slight dent in the lower panel, like someone had backed into it with a trailer hitch and pretended it didn't happen. Another door's handle had rust on it that stained the metal below in a thin orange line. Normal stuff. Wear and tear. I crouched once to look at the bottom edge of a door because the pavement under it was darker, like it had gotten wet and dried. It was probably oil from someone's car. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. On that first loop, I kept glancing toward the 3-story block in the middle of the property. It sat deeper in the lot, bigger than the rows, a rectangular building with a side entrance where that interior exit sign pointed. The entrance was under an overhang, like a loading door area, but smaller. The light there was dimmer, and the angle made it look like a cut into something solid. It wasn't scary exactly. It was just a place I didn't have to go, and I liked that. I finished the loop and came back to the office around 10:25 p.m. I went inside, latched the door behind me, and wrote my notes into the logbook with short phrases that wouldn't confuse me later. 10:15 p.m. patrol loop, light pole flicker, pole buzz, dim bulb, door dent B row, rust handle, fence line secure, no people, no vehicles. Writing it down made it feel clean and contained, like I'd put the night back into a box and labeled it. I sat down, took a sip of water, and let myself breathe. The next hour went the way quiet hours do. Not boring exactly, because boring requires comfort. It was more like waiting. I watched the camera monitor without staring at it, because I didn't want to do the thing the rules warned against. Every once in a while, one feed would do that tiny hesitation. The timestamp would repeat the same second and then continue. If you weren't looking for it, you wouldn't notice. If you were looking for it, you'd start building stories around it. I didn't want stories. I wanted mourning. I did paperwork to keep my mind occupied. Not real paperwork, just the kind of organizing you do when you need to feel useful. I flipped through a maintenance binder in the filing cabinet, scanned old notes about locks and lights. I found a stack of blank incident forms in a drawer and put them back without reading too much into that. Storage facilities had paperwork for everything. People got locked out, people claimed theft, people complained about leaks. That didn't mean anything. It was just business. At 11:15 p.m., I did the second loop. This one felt colder, like the temperature dropped another few degrees while I was sitting still. The wind had picked up too, and when it hit the fence, it made the chain link rattle with a soft metallic tremor. It wasn't loud, but it was constant, like a nervous habit. The lot looked the same as before. Same rows, same lights, same patches of shadow. The flickering light still flickered, the buzzing pole still buzzed. I made a mental note that if I was still here in 30 days, I'd probably stop noticing any of it. That was the scary part, honestly, how quickly a person adapts to environments that don't care about them. I kept my loop consistent. I didn't cut closer to the indoor hallway. I didn't go exploring. The rules didn't say I couldn't go in there, not unless the exit sign flickered, but I had no reason to test it. Every job I'd ever had that went sideways started with someone saying, "I'll just check real quick." I'd checked enough real quick things in my life. I wasn't doing it here. On the second loop, I found one lock that looked off. Not broken, not open, just not sitting right. The shackle looked like it was threaded through the latch at a slight angle. It could have been nothing. Someone could have snapped it on half asleep and never fixed it. I shined my flashlight at it and tugged lightly on the lock without yanking. It held. I didn't mess with it more than that. I wrote down the unit number from the stencil and kept walking. The sound from my 90 felt farther away out there. Maybe because the wind shifted, maybe because I was deeper in the rows. I could still hear it, but it came in duller. What I heard more clearly were my own steps and the occasional ping of something metal moving when the wind hit it. A loose piece of signage, a cable on a pole, a staircase on the 3-story block creaking as it flexed. When I came back in at 11:28 p.m., I wrote the second loop notes down. 11:15 p.m. patrol loop, same lights, same fence. Lock on unit C, 12 angled but secure. No activity. That time stuck to the inside of my head, like a song lyric you can't stop hearing once you've noticed it. I sat down again and tried to relax my shoulders. My body wanted to tense up every time the building made a noise, and the building made noises constantly. Heater cycling, fluorescent hum, the desk chair squeaking when I shifted my weight. None of it meant anything. It just sounded like it did when you were alone. The rules about the phone kept circling in my head, though. Only answer if the ring pattern breaks. Ring, pause, ring. It was an oddly specific thing to put on paper. If they wanted you to screen calls, they could have just said, "Don't answer after hours." If they wanted you to take emergency calls, they could have said, "Answer immediately." Instead, they wanted timing. A pause. I kept looking at the phone like it was going to do something just because I was thinking about it. It didn't. The beige plastic sat there, silent, the coil cord curled like a sleeping snake. I told myself I was being dramatic and opened the maintenance binder again just to keep my eyes moving. Around 11:40 p.m., I noticed the exit sign in the interior window flicker. Not the one above the office door, the one that pointed toward the indoor hallway entrance. It wasn't a big flash, more like a pulse, as if someone had tapped the power. I froze with my hand on the binder page. I stared at it for a second, waiting to see if it would do it again. It stayed steady. My first instinct was to stand and look closer, to walk over and check the wiring or see if the sign was loose. Then Rule 3 surfaced in my head like it had been waiting there. If the exit sign flickers, treat the hallway as closed. Wait 60 seconds with both feet on the office floor before moving anywhere. It felt stupid, but I did it. I sat down, planted my feet flat, and counted slowly. 1, 2, 3. I didn't look at my phone. I didn't look at the monitor. I just listened to the wall clock click and let the minutes stretch out. When I hit 60, I stood up. Nothing had changed. The sign stayed steady. The building sounded the same. My skin still crawled a little, but that was me, not the place. I wrote a note in the logbook. 11:40 p.m. Interior exit sign flicker once. Waited 60 seconds. No further flicker. I didn't like how calm that made me feel. Like the rules could turn fear into a task. Like all I had to do to stay safe was follow directions. Life didn't work that way, but my brain wanted it to. Midnight started creeping closer, and I caught myself thinking ahead to the quiet window. 2:17 a.m. to 2:22 a.m. The fact that it was in the protocol at all made it feel like something that had happened before, something that caused them to write it down. I didn't know what. I didn't want to know. I just wanted to make it to 6 a.m. with a clean logbook and a paycheck. At 11:55 p.m., I wrote a quick line to keep myself honest. 11:55 p.m., all systems normal. Then I sat and watched the wall clock hit 12 a.m. The second hand clicked, the minute changed, and nothing dramatic happened. No power surge, no sudden noise. Just another minute. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me feel like the night was patient. I made coffee in my thermos cap and drank it slowly so I'd have something to do with my hands. Bitter, lukewarm, but it worked. I kept my eyes mostly off the monitor because the more I watched those timestamps, the more I wanted to chase them. Every time I noticed the camera stutter, I had to fight the urge to lean in and confirm. I reminded myself that the protocol didn't say fix it, it said stop watching it. Like attention was the fuel. At 12:30 a.m., I did another loop, the third one. Same route, same units, same lights. The wind had eased and the fence wasn't rattling as much, which somehow felt worse. The silence between highway swells lasted longer. When a car finally passed on I-90, the sound felt like relief. Nothing was open, nothing was moving. No shadows doing anything strange. I didn't see a single person. That was what a storage facility at night was supposed to be. Empty, locked, boring. Back inside at 12:43 a.m., I wrote it down. 12:30 a.m. patrol loop. No changes, no activity. My handwriting looked normal. My brain latched onto that, like it was proof I was still in control. I stared at the page a little longer than I needed to, then forced myself to stop. The more I focused on proving reality, the more fragile it felt. The desk phone stayed quiet for almost another hour. I started to believe it might never ring, that the rule was there because someone had gotten too jumpy and answered a robocall at 0200 a.m. and caused a headache. That was the kind of explanation I wanted. Boring explanations, safety memo explanations. The heater clicked on. Warm air pushed through the vent near the filing cabinet. The fluorescent lights hummed. The wall clock kept clicking. The camera monitor showed the gate and the empty lane outside, and every once in a while, the timestamp would hiccup like a heartbeat skipping. At 1:27 a.m., the desk phone rang. It wasn't loud. It wasn't soft either. It was that old mechanical ring that fills a small room fast. The first ring came clean and even, then stopped. My eyes went to the phone immediately. I didn't move. I listened. Second ring, same length, same pitch. No pause between the rings beyond the normal beat. Third ring, still even. I waited for the break the rules described. Ring, pause, ring. Something that felt different. The pattern stayed steady. The phone kept ringing like it could do it forever. I didn't pick it up. I let it ring until it stopped on its own. The silence after was heavier than the ringing. I realized my shoulders were tight again. I wrote it down anyway. 1:27 a.m. Desk phone rang steady. No pause. Did not answer. I sat back, took a breath, and tried to feel proud of myself for following the rule. It didn't land. Following the rule just made me more aware that the rule existed for a reason. At 1:40 a.m., I did another patrol loop, the fourth one. I didn't want to, but I didn't want to sit inside and stare at the phone either. Outside, the air was colder again, the kind that makes your lungs feel crisp when you inhale. The lot was still empty. The lights still made those pockets of shadow. As I came around the fence line, I looked toward the indoor block again. The side entrance was still there under the overhang, still dimmer than it should have been. The exit sign down the line looked steady. I told myself I was fine. Back in the office at 1:53 a.m., I logged the loop. 1:40 a.m. patrol loop. No activity, all doors secure. Then, at 1:58 a.m., the desk phone rang again. This time the first ring came, Then there was a longer gap before the next one. Not huge. Just enough that my brain noticed it. A pause where there hadn't been a pause before. Ring, pause, ring. My stomach tightened. I hated how fast my body believed the paper. I picked up on the first ring after the pause, holding the handset like it might bite me. "Ridgeline checkpoint," a man said. "This is Cameron," I said. "Log your last walk," he said. 11:15, I said. It wasn't true. My last walk was 1:40 a.m. I knew that. I'd just written it down, but the words came out anyway, like my brain grabbed the first official time it could remember. The second I said it, I felt my face go hot with embarrassment, even though he couldn't see me. He didn't react. He didn't correct me. He just kept talking in the same flat tone, like the mistake didn't matter or like it proved something. "Don't use the indoor hallway tonight," he said flatly. "Who is this?" I asked. The line went dead. Not a click. Not the soft hang-up sound. Just dead air that turned into a dial tone a second later, like the call had been cut with scissors. I stared at the handset for a moment before I set it back down. My hand was steady, but my chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath without realizing it. The words he'd said weren't dramatic, but they landed heavy because they matched what Rena had implied without saying. "Don't use the indoor hallway tonight," as if that was the part that mattered, as if tonight was different from any other night. I looked at the logbook. My handwriting was there, plain as day. 11:15. I hadn't meant to say it. I hadn't meant to write it. I just complied. I grabbed the pen and wrote a correction beneath it. Call at 1:58 a.m. Asked for last walk. I answered wrong. Last walk was 1:40 a.m. I underlined it once, not because the paper needed it, but because I did. I needed to see myself push back somewhere, even if it was only with ink. Then I sat still and stared at the wall clock. The second hand clicked forward like it always had. The minute hand inched along without rushing. Outside, the highway made its distant waves of sound. Inside, the office held its breath with me. In the quiet window, the one thing on that page that felt like a trap, sat ahead in the night like a pinned date on a calendar I couldn't cancel. 2:17 a.m. to 2:22 a.m., 5 minutes. That was all. I kept my hands flat on the desk and waited for the next hour to arrive. After the call, I tried to reset myself the way you do after you say something embarrassing in public. You don't dwell on it, you don't replay it, you just keep moving and hope it fades. I kept my eyes on the wall clock, forced a few slow breaths, and told myself it was nothing. First night nerves, a weird phone call, a brain fart, that was all. I flipped the logbook page back and forth, checking my own notes like I was auditing myself. The correction was there, underlined. The ink was still fresh enough that it looked slightly darker than the lines above it. If I stared at it too long, it started to feel like proof of weakness instead of proof of control, so I stopped. I sat back and let the room do what it had been doing all night. The heater cycled, the fluorescent lights hummed, the camera monitor glowed. Outside, the highway came and went in soft waves. The whole place was still, but not the calm kind of still. It felt like the pause you get right before a store opens, when everything is set and clean and waiting for the first customer to break the quiet. I kept thinking about the rule that said not to switch feeds for 10 minutes after a camera glitch. It sounded like nonsense when I read it, but now it made my skin itch, like it was a line written by someone who'd learned a lesson the hard way. Don't chase the glitch. Don't try to prove it. Don't go looking for the moment it breaks. A few minutes later, I saw it happen in the top right feed. It wasn't dramatic. It was a small, almost polite mistake. The timestamp in the corner clicked forward the way it should, then suddenly repeated the same second. The image on the screen didn't jump. No blur, no flicker, no static. Just time stalling for one beat. Then it moved forward again. If I hadn't been primed for it, I would have missed it. If I'd been in my apartment, half asleep on the couch, I would have blamed the cheap camera. Here, sitting in a locked office with a protocol sheet telling me not to stare at it, that tiny hesitation felt like a hand tapping the glass. The worst part was how my brain wanted to fix it. I could feel the urge to lean closer, to squint at the numbers, to confirm whether it truly repeated or if I imagined it. That impulse was so automatic it scared me. Like the glitch wasn't just happening on the screen, it was happening in me. Rule 5 came back word for word. If any feed jumps backward or skips forward, stop watching it. Look away for 30 seconds, then keep working and don't switch feeds for 10 minutes. So I did it. I turned my head and stared at the filing cabinet instead, at the plain metal surface and the scuffed handle in the corner where the paint had chipped. I counted in my head, slow, steady. I didn't count like a kid trying to race. I counted like I was timing something important. 10, 15, 20. By the time I hit 30, my eyes felt dry, like I hadn't blinked enough. I looked back at the monitor. The feed was stable. The timestamp moved forward normally. The lot view was the same as it had been. Orange doors under floodlight, no movement, no people. The kind of normal that almost annoyed me because it made it harder to know what I'd seen. I sat there for another minute, hands flat on the desk, and told myself that was it. That was the test. The equipment was old, it hiccuped. I followed the rule, and nothing happened. That was the best possible outcome. Then my eyes dropped to the logbook. There was a new line in it, not a full entry, not a note about a patrol, just a single time written in the leftmost column, sitting between two of my earlier lines like it belonged there. No location, no notes, no initials, just the time. 1:52 a.m. My stomach went cold. I didn't move at first, I just stared at it like if I stared long enough it might change back. It didn't. The ink looked fresh, as dark as the line I'd written when I corrected my mistake on the phone call. The handwriting looked like mine, but it wasn't quite right. Mine leaned a little, especially when I wrote fast. This was too upright, too even. Like someone had copied my style without the small mess that comes from an actual hand. I picked up the pen I'd been using and held it over the page without touching it. The tip hovered a fraction of an inch above the paper. My fingers felt stiff, like they were waiting for a signal. I checked the pen barrel. Cheap black gel pen from the desk drawer, no special markings. I clicked it once, just to hear the tiny plastic snap, then realized what I was doing and stopped. I set it down gently like it was fragile. I rubbed my fingertips together. No ink, no smudge. I checked the side of my hand, the edge of my palm where pen ink sometimes transfers when you write on paper without realizing it. Nothing. I flipped back a page and looked at my earlier entries. The same pen strokes, the same pressure, the same ink darkness. The time in the new line matched the style of my other times, but it looked calmer. Too calm. I wanted to believe I'd written it and forgotten. That's what my brain grabbed for. Maybe I'd spaced out and scribbled it. Maybe I'd written it while the phone was ringing earlier and my attention was split. Maybe I'd meant to note something and stopped halfway. People do weird half things when they're tired. But the time didn't make sense with what I remembered. I'd been sitting at the desk, staring at the monitor and the wall clock. I hadn't done a patrol at 1:52 a.m. I hadn't even stood up. I'd been trying to quiet my head after the call. I looked at the wall clock again, as if it could settle the argument. It ticked forward without drama. The minute hand crept along. Nothing wrong with it. The clock didn't care about my confusion. I took a breath and forced myself to go practical. If the logbook had a line I didn't recognize, then I needed to respond like a person doing a job, not like a person in a scary story. I couldn't erase it. I couldn't pretend it wasn't there. So I added a note, short and clean, right beside it. Unverified entry. I didn't sign it. I didn't initial it. I just wrote those 2 words and drew a single line under them. My hand shook a little. Not a lot, but enough that the letters came out less neat than I wanted. The heater clicked off, and the sudden quiet made my ears ring. For a second, I could hear the wall clock more clearly than before, every tick like a small step. I didn't like that. I didn't like how much attention I was paying to rhythm now, like the night was trying to teach me a lesson in timing. I sat there for a moment, then made myself stand. Sitting and staring was how you spiral. The rules wanted consistency. The only way to fight whatever this was, whether it was a glitch or fatigue or something else, was to keep moving the way the shift was supposed to move. One patrol loop. That was it. I didn't need to run the whole property. I didn't need to investigate every shadow. I just needed to do the loop I'd been doing and see if the world outside matched the world on the screen. I checked my pockets again. Keys, flashlight. I looked at the wall clock and waited for a clean minute, the way I had at the start of the shift. When it clicked, I wrote the time in the logbook with a normal entry this time, like nothing was wrong. 2:04 a.m. patrol loop. Then I went out. The cold hit harder now, not because the temperature dropped, but because my body had been warm inside and my nerves were tight. The air smelled like dry dirt and metal and a faint hint of pine from somewhere beyond the fence line. The floodlights buzzed quietly overhead. The shadows between them looked deeper than they had earlier, but that might have been because I was looking for them now. I walked the same route, forcing my eyes to notice boring things. The sticker on the light pole, the cracks in the pavement, the weeds pushing through the seam at the edge of a curb, the padlocks hanging straight, some of them scuffed, some shiny. The fence line intact, no cut links, no gaps under it. Everything looked normal. That was the second worst part. The first worst part was the new line in the logbook. The second worst part was that the lot didn't look like it had any reason to create that line. I turned down the aisle that ran along the B row, because it was the clearest path back toward the office. The orange doors stretched down both sides like a repeating pattern. Same color, same ridges, same stenciled numbers. The uniformity should have been comforting. Instead, it made any tiny difference jump out. Halfway down the aisle, one door caught my eye. I couldn't tell you why at first. Nothing about it was obviously wrong. It was closed. The lock was on. The number stencil looked normal, but the way the bottom edge of the door sat against the concrete looked off by a hair, like it wasn't perfectly flush, like the door had been lifted and set back down and didn't land exactly where it had been. I stopped and stared at it. The rational part of my brain tried to explain it immediately. Uneven ground, old door, bent track, normal wear. Storage doors aren't precision instruments. They rattle, they warp, they sags over time. But my body didn't accept that. My body treated it like a sign. I walked closer, slow, not because I was sneaking, but because I was trying not to overreact. The floodlight above that aisle was one of the ones that worked well, and it cast a clean, bright circle on the pavement. I could see the lock clearly now. A standard padlock, scuffed and dull, hanging through the latch. I crouched and shined my flashlight along the bottom seam of the door. No gap big enough to fit fingers through. No scrape marks fresh enough to look new. No obvious pry points on the latch. The door looked shut. The lock looked locked. I reached out and touched the lock with the back of my knuckles first, like that would tell me something my palm wouldn't. Cold. Not cool, not room temperature. Cold like it had been sitting in night air for hours. If someone had put their hand on it recently, it would have held a bit of warmth. Metal keeps heat. It doesn't forget right away. I checked the ground around it. The pavement was dusty in places, with thin lines where wind had pushed grit into little drifts. If someone had walked here recently, there would have been a smear, a print, something. I saw nothing. No footprints, no tire marks, no fresh scuffs, just old dirt and the faint pattern of pebbles embedded in concrete. I stood up and looked down the aisle both ways. Empty. The rows stretched out and vanished into shadow where the floodlights didn't reach. The fence beyond them was a dark line. The sound from I-90 rose in the distance, then faded again. I didn't touch the door. I didn't test it. I didn't shake the lock to prove it was secure. That kind of proving felt like the exact thing the protocol was trying to keep me from doing, chasing the difference, feeding it attention, sinking to it. So I did what I was supposed to do. I kept walking. I finished the loop without adding extra detours. I came back to the office and locked myself inside the same way I had earlier, like the door was a boundary I could trust. At the desk, the camera monitor still showed the same 4 feeds, nothing moving, the timestamps rolling, the lot quiet. I opened the logbook and wrote the patrol entry the way I always had, short and practical. 2:04 a.m. patrol loop, all rows secure, no people, no vehicles. Noted possible door shift B row, lock cold and intact, no tracks. Then I stared at the unverified timeline again, the one that didn't belong. I tried to explain it one more time. Fatigue. First night. My brain filling gaps, a pen mark that happened when I leaned on the page, an old impression from a previous sheet. Anything. But the ink was too dark for that. The line was too clean. The timing was too convenient. It showed up right after a camera feed repeated a second, like the property was trying to pull my attention into a rhythm I didn't understand. And the moment I followed the protocol and looked away, it wrote itself into my paperwork anyway. That's when it hit me, not as panic, but as a dull, practical understanding. This wasn't random. It wasn't a broken camera or a weird phone call. It was a system, a pattern. The lot was doing small corrections to keep something aligned, and the rules weren't there to stop it. The rules were there to keep me from aligning with it. I sat back in the chair and forced myself to breathe slow. I didn't look at my phone. I didn't touch the desk phone. I didn't switch camera feeds. I just listened to the wall clock and let the seconds pass. The night still felt quiet, but now it felt deliberate, like it was waiting for the next test and it already knew what time it would arrive. A little after 2, the office stopped feeling like a room and started feeling like a test. Nothing dramatic changed. The lights didn't dim. The door didn't rattle. It was subtler than that, like the air itself was waiting to see what I'd do next. I'd been keeping my hands flat on the desk, like I could keep my own nerves from making noise by pinning them down. The protocol sheet sat where I could see it. The logbook stayed open, a clean page ready for whatever came next. I was doing the job the way they wanted it done, and I hated that a part of me kept thinking that mattered to someone besides a manager. The interior exit sign in the window toward the 3-story block flickered again. Not the kind of flicker you miss if you blink. It blinked hard enough that my eyes snapped to it, then it steadied like nothing happened. The arrow still pointed toward that indoor hallway entrance, and I didn't like the way my brain tried to turn the blink into a message. I didn't stand. I didn't walk toward the window. I forced myself into the rule that had already saved me from my own curiosity once tonight. Both feet on the office floor. Count 60. Wait it out. When I was done counting, I wrote it down in the logbook, short and plain, because plain was the only thing I trusted. At 2:10 a.m., the desk phone rang in that steady pattern again. No pause, no break. Just the same clean ring repeating like it was being generated, not dialed. The receiver trembled in its cradle. I let it ring. Rule 4 was clear, and I wasn't giving steady rings anything from me, not my voice, not my attention, not even a flinch if I could help it. It rang longer than any normal call would. The patience of it got under my skin because it didn't sound angry. It sounded certain. When it finally stopped, the silence that followed felt heavier than the noise. I logged it. I didn't editorialize. I didn't write how my stomach felt. I wrote what happened. A couple minutes later, it rang again, and I knew before my hand even moved that the pattern had changed. Ring, pause, ring. The pause wasn't huge. It was just long enough to feel intentional, like it was giving me room to choose. My throat went dry. The rules didn't give me many choices. They gave me a narrow lane and dared me to stay in it. The pause was the only lane where answering was allowed, and I hated that I was relieved to have permission, even though the permission felt like a hook. I picked up. "Answer and stay calm," he said. The voice was the same man as earlier, calm and flat, like he was reading from a card. The weird part wasn't what he said. It was how close it sounded, like he wasn't calling from a distant office or a car, but from somewhere that shared the same tight walls and the same stale air. "Who is this?" I asked. "Quiet windows coming," he said flatly. My eyes went to the wall clock without me choosing it, like my body wanted a number to hold on to. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "Don't miss 217, he told me. The line went dead. Not a click. Not a hang-up sound. Just dead air that turned into dial tone a second later, like someone cut the connection and then restored it to prove they could. I set the receiver down slowly. My hand was steady, but my chest felt tight, like I'd been pulled forward by a rope, and now I could feel the burn on my palms. I wrote the call down because stopping felt worse. Stopping felt like giving in. I kept the entry clean, the way I'd been trying to keep everything clean all night. It didn't make me feel better. It made me feel watched. Right before the window, the interior exit sign flickered again, sharper this time, like it was trying to get my attention at the exact worst moment. My first instinct was to stand and look through the window toward the indoor hallway entrance, like maybe I'd see something, like maybe seeing would give me control. I didn't. I stayed seated. I planted my feet. I counted. The rule didn't care if I felt stupid. The rule cared that I didn't move. I kept thinking about that line in the logbook that had appeared earlier, the time I didn't write but somehow had my handwriting. It made the phone call feel less like a warning and more like coordination, like something out there could nudge the night forward and leave little markers behind to see if I followed. The next time I glanced at the camera monitor, all 4 feeds hesitated for a heartbeat, not a stutter in one corner. All of them. Like the screen turned into a photograph and then remembered it was supposed to be video again. The timestamps were too small for me to focus on without staring, so I didn't. I followed Rule 5 anyway, because I didn't trust my own certainty anymore. I looked away, counted 30, then looked back and kept my eyes on shapes instead of numbers. Then the wall clock clicked into 2:17 a.m., and the office changed in a way I couldn't put into a tidy sentence. It didn't go dark. It didn't get loud. It felt like pressure, like the air in the room got thicker and every small sound became a decision. The door felt closer, like the space between it and my chair had been shortened. The corners felt deeper, like light had stopped reaching them cleanly. I sat still the way the protocol demanded, hands flat, feet planted, no tapping, no shifting, no pen. I kept my gaze low, away from the timestamps, away from anything that could pull me into counting seconds too hard. I focused on breathing slow because breathing was the only rhythm I couldn't stop, and even that felt risky. The desk phone didn't ring. The camera monitor stayed on. The heater vent whispered. The fluorescents hummed. Everything was technically normal, and that made it worse, because it meant the only thing that had changed was my sense of being alone. Then I heard a sound at the office door. Not a knock, not the handle. A soft scrape on the outside surface, like something dragged along it lightly and then stopped. It lasted less than a second, but it landed in my chest like a weight. I stared at the handle. It didn't move. No rattle. No twist. No obvious threat. Just that scrape. And then stillness again. My brain lit up with tasks. Check the lock, check the cameras, check the closet, fix something before something happens. The urge was so strong, it felt like it didn't belong to me, like the room was pushing me toward motion the way a crowd pushes you toward an exit. I held still for a few more beats, but my nerves snapped in the dumbest way. I stood up. The chair wheels squeaked, a small sound that felt huge inside that quiet window. The moment it happened, my stomach dropped, because I knew I'd just created a rhythm, and the whole point of the window was not to. I crossed to the closet door beside the filing cabinet and pulled it open. The breaker panel was right there, gray metal box with a column of switches labeled in faded marker. A power strip sat on the floor with cords plugged into it, and I crouched with my flashlight to check it, like checking it could make the night obey. My knee bumped the strip. The camera monitor went black. All 4 feeds vanished at once. The office got darker, even though the overhead lights were still on, because that monitor glow had been filling the room more than I realized. For 2 or 3 seconds, sound direction stopped making sense. The heater vent sounded like it was behind me and above me. The wall clock sounded too close, like it was inside my head. The office door felt wrong, like it wasn't across the room anymore. And then I felt pressure at the door. Immediate and certain, like something leaned its weight against it from the other side, without knocking, without touching the handle, just letting me know it was there and it knew the cameras were down. My hands fumbled for the plug. I shoved it back into the strip hard, twisting it slightly, like force could fix what calm couldn't. The monitor flashed back on. All 4 feeds returned, grainy and bright, like they'd never been gone. The lot looked empty. The gate lane looked normal. No figure, no movement, nothing I could point to and say, there, that's what I felt. But the pressure didn't fully leave. It eased, like whoever was there stepped back half an inch and stayed. I backed away from the closet and closed the door gently. I sat down again, slow, planted my feet, and tried to make myself small in my own chair. The wall clock read 2:18 a.m., and my hands were shaking now, too hard to hide under the desk. The cameras were back, the lights were on, the phone was quiet. Everything looked normal. But I knew something had changed. I'd created a gap. I'd given the room a few seconds without witnesses. I'd moved when the rules demanded stillness, and the moment I did, the place pushed back in the only way it needed to, not with noise or violence, but with certainty. I stayed seated and quiet for the rest of the window because there was nothing else left to do. The ticking seconds kept moving forward, and with every click I understood the trap more clearly. The trap wasn't the phone call or the exit sign or the cameras. The trap was my urge to fix things. The moment I reached for control, the property reached back, and it didn't feel angry. It felt like it had been waiting for proof I could be moved. I stayed in that chair like it was the last solid thing in the room, like if I stood up again, I'd give the property another opening. My hands shook hard enough that I could feel it in my forearms, so I pressed my palms flat on the desk and held them there until the tremor settled into something smaller. The camera monitor kept glowing in the corner, the feeds moving, the lot looking empty. The desk phone sat in its cradle like nothing had happened. The office lights buzzed steady overhead. Everything looked normal, and that was the part that felt like a lie. I kept my eyes on the wall clock and tried to breathe slow without turning it into a count. I didn't want to mark seconds anymore. Marking seconds felt like tapping your foot to a song you didn't realize was playing. I let my breath come and go without forcing a pattern, and I tried to make myself boring. A person sitting in a chair, alone, doing nothing. The quiet window was already in motion, whether I liked it or not. I could feel it like you feel pressure in your ears before a storm. Not loud, not dramatic, just wrong enough to make your body want to move. I didn't move. I didn't type on the computer. I didn't touch the pen. I didn't shift the chair. I didn't even reach for my coffee. I kept my hands where I could see them and my feet planted where I could feel the floor. It wasn't courage. It was discipline. It was the only tool I had left. The desk phone didn't ring. Instead, it vibrated, faintly, like something electrical was running through the plastic body. It wasn't loud enough to be the ringer. It was a low tremor, a shiver, and I could see the receiver tremble a fraction of an inch against the cradle as if the line had a pulse. The sight made my stomach tighten because it meant the phone was alive without doing what phones are supposed to do. I kept my eyes off it. I didn't lean in to check. I didn't lift the receiver. I didn't test it. I let it vibrate and pretended it was nothing, the same way you ignore a bad sound in your car because you don't want to know what it means. The camera monitor did the same thing it had done before. A feed held a frame for a beat, then continued. The temptation was immediate. My eyes wanted to lock onto the timestamp and prove it. I gave myself a quick glance at the picture instead. Fence line, gate lane, rows of doors, nothing moving. Then I looked away. I stared at the filing cabinet, at the blank wall, at the edge of the desk. I let the monitor exist in my peripheral vision without giving it my focus. The rule wasn't about blindness. It was about refusing to sink. Watching too closely felt like sinking. Counting the glitches felt like sinking. Trying to catch the moment it repeated felt like stepping into the rhythm on purpose. Outside the office door, the pressure returned. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a knock. It was the sense of weight, like someone stood close enough that the air between them and the door had nowhere to go. The door didn't bow inward. The handle didn't move. The deadbolt stayed locked. But the space right in front of it felt occupied, and my skin prickled the way it does when someone stands behind you in line and you can feel their breath on your neck. I kept my eyes on the desk. I didn't glance at the peephole. I didn't press my ear to the door. Those were reactions. Reactions were the point. I held my posture steady. No fidgeting, no tapping, no foot bouncing. I tried not to swallow too loud. Then the voice came, soft enough that for a second I thought it was in my head. "Open up, man," a voice said quietly. It wasn't the phone. It didn't come from the handset. It didn't echo the way a voice should echo in a small office. It sounded close, like it was right on the other side of the door, mouth near the seam, speaking without urgency, without anger, like it expected the request to be honored, like it expected me to do what people do when they hear a normal sentence in a normal place. I didn't answer. I didn't clear my throat. I didn't shift in my chair. I kept my hands flat and my feet planted, and I stared at the same spot on the desk until my eyes watered from not blinking enough. The pressure at the door didn't change. It stayed there, steady, patient, waiting for me to give it anything, a word, a breath, a movement, anything it could match. I refused. On the camera monitor, one roll-up door lifted halfway. I didn't hear it. The office had no audio from the feeds, and the lot was too far for a metal door to carry clearly through the walls. I only saw it in the top right panel, the B-row view under the floodlight. The orange door rose in a smooth, slow motion, like it was being pulled up from inside by someone who knew exactly how much force to use. It went up to about chest height and stopped, not slammed to a stop. Held, like a hand was keeping it there. I felt my eyes wanting to lock on it, to track every inch of movement, to understand. I gave myself one more quick glance, enough to see it was real, enough to see it wasn't wind. Then I looked away. That was the hard part. Not the door lifting, not the pressure, not the phone vibrating like it had a heartbeat. The hard part was refusing to stare at the proof, because staring is participation. If I watched long enough, I'd start predicting what came next. If I started predicting, I'd start counting. If I started counting, I'd start sinking. And sinking was exactly what the place wanted from me. A rhythm, a response, a pattern it could match. So I sat there and let the monitor glow without giving it my attention. I stared at the edge of the logbook instead, at the lines and columns, at the blank space where a new time could appear if it wanted. I kept my breathing slow and shallow, not dramatic, just quiet. The door pressure intensified for a moment, like whoever was out there leaned closer. Not enough to make the door move, just enough that my ears felt full, like the air in the office had been compressed. The hairs on my arms stood up. I swallowed once, careful, and it felt too loud in my throat. The desk phone vibrated again, a little stronger. The receiver quivered against the cradle like it wanted to jump. I didn't touch it. The camera feed stuttered again in my peripheral vision. I didn't chase it. I stayed still until the wall clock moved past the window. I didn't count down. I didn't count up. I just watched the minute hand the way you watch a pot on a stove when you're trying not to panic, waiting for the moment you can turn it off. When the window passed, everything stopped at once. The phone's vibration cut out mid-shiver, like a switch flipped. The pressure at the door vanished so cleanly it felt like someone stepped away from the door and never existed there at all. The air in the office returned to normal, thinner, easier to breathe. Even the fluorescent hum seemed less sharp, like my ears had been held tight and then released. I turned my head slightly and looked at the camera monitor again, fully this time. The roll-up door on the feed was down again, closed like it had never moved. The lot was empty. No shadows where a person should be, no vehicle lights, no motion. Just the same orange doors and the same pale pool of floodlight. The sudden normality made me feel sick, because it meant the thing that happened wasn't a break-in, it wasn't a mistake, it wasn't a person I could point to. It was the property itself, adjusting, testing, collecting reactions, and then resetting the scene when it got what it wanted. I sat there with my hands still on the desk and understood the truth in a way that didn't feel like a revelation, just a cold, practical fact I should have known the moment I saw a time appear in my logbook. The place wasn't keeping people out, it was keeping moments from leaving, and I'd almost given it mine. At 6 a.m., the office light steadied like someone had finally tightened a loose connection. The fluorescents didn't buzz any louder, but the air changed. The room stopped feeling held. The camera monitor kept cycling through its feeds with the same grainy confidence it had all night, and for the first time since I'd walked in, the normal parts of the job felt like they actually belonged to the place. I sat for a minute with my hands on the desk, waiting for the last 5 minutes to take something else from me. Nothing did. The desk phone stayed silent. The exit sign stayed solid red. The lot on the monitor looked like a storage lot again, not a machine trying to teach me timing. I stood up slowly, like I didn't trust my legs to remember how to be calm. The chair squeaked, and I flinched at the sound out of habit, then realized it didn't matter anymore. I took the keys from my pocket, walked to the door, and unlocked the deadbolt. The lock clicked free with a clean metallic snap. I pulled the door open and stepped outside. The air smelled like dust and cardboard and cold concrete. No chemical bite, no strange sweetness. Just that dry, stale smell storage facilities always have, like old moving boxes and plastic totes. Dawn was turning the sky a dull gray, and the floodlights looked less harsh in the growing light. The chain-link fence was just chain-link fence. The empty lots beyond it were just gravel and weeds. Highway noise drifted in steady waves, nothing more. I walked back inside and did the one thing I needed to do before my brain tried to convince me it had all been a stress hallucination. I opened the filing cabinet and pulled the access log printouts again, the faded thermal paper that tracked the gate keypad. I found the line for the night and ran my finger down until I hit the time. 2:19 a.m. accepted. That was it. No code listed beside it, no identifier. Just accepted, printed so faint it looked like the printer had run out of ink mid-word. The timestamp was clear, darker than the rest, like the machine wanted the time to be readable and nothing else. I stared at that line until the paper started to blur. I didn't like what it implied. Something had been accepted at 2:19 a.m., and the system either couldn't record what it was or didn't want to. I put the printout back in the folder and closed the drawer. Then I grabbed my phone and took photos, not just one. I took a close shot of the 02:19 a.m. dot line, then a wider shot that showed the date above it and the entries around it. I wasn't trying to build a case for anyone. I was trying to anchor myself to something that couldn't change if I stopped looking at it. After that, I walked out into the lot again. The morning light had crept farther over the rows, softening the hard angles of the doors and staircases. The place almost looked ordinary. That was what scared me most, how fast it could go back to pretending. I headed toward the row I'd seen on camera during the quiet window, the one where the door had lifted halfway and held. I didn't run. I didn't sneak. I just walked like an employee doing a final check. The door was closed. The lock was intact. But there was a scrape down the metal that hadn't been there before, long and uneven, starting around waist height and dragging down toward the bottom edge. Not a dent like something punched it. A smear like something heavy had slid across it and left a mark in the paint. Up close it looked wet, but when I touched it with my glove it was dry and tacky, like residue that had dried in place. It caught the light in a dull streak. I stepped back and looked at the ground. Nothing. No footprints, no tire marks, no scuff trails. The dust on the pavement sat undisturbed, except for my own shoes. If something had been dragged there, it had left its trace only on the door, like it didn't need the ground to cooperate. I took photos of that too, close and wide. Then I stopped myself before I turned it into an investigation. I wasn't there to solve it. I just needed proof it happened. Back in the office, I set the keyring on the desk and laid the protocol sheet beside it. I didn't crumple it. I didn't tear it. I didn't want to do anything that felt like a challenge. I took a photo of the rules, then another photo with the desk and the monitor and frame, like a timestamp of my own. Then I zipped my bag and left everything else exactly where it belonged. I didn't call anyone. I didn't write a resignation note. I just walked out, locked the office door from the outside the way the key allowed, and got in my car. When my phone finally caught a signal again, a text came through from Rena. She asked why I wasn't in the office and why the log looked incomplete. I didn't answer with words. I sent the photos, the access log line, the protocol sheet, the scrape on the door. A minute later, another text came in. It was one sentence. She told me that the quiet window doesn't end when the clock says it does. It ends when the property decides you're done. I stared at that message until my hands started shaking again. Then I blocked the number and threw the phone onto the passenger seat like it was hot. I drove south with both hands on the wheel and kept my speed exactly where it should be. The road looked normal. The traffic looked normal. The world outside the lot behaved like the world I remembered. But the rest of the day, time felt wrong in small ways. My car clock drifted by a minute and then corrected itself after I looked away. A microwave timer skipped a second, like it stuttered. My phone's timestamp on one of the photos didn't match the order I took them in. Nothing I could take to a mechanic, nothing anyone would believe. I stopped staring at time readouts after that. I stopped watching the second-hand crawl. I stopped trying to catch the exact moment something changed. Because I'd learned what the place wanted from me, and it wasn't my body. It was my attention.